I would like to thank everyone for coming to our second GAP session. This one is Marketing Your Unique Skill Set. I'd like to thank the whole LOC for helping us to get this together, as well as our speakers here today. So we have three people who are going to be giving a joint presentation, and then two others who are going to be joining in on the panel. So our first, well, I'm not sure exactly how you're ordering the speakers, but just in the order that I see you on the screen. Our first speaker is Rebecca Maymon, who is an academic associate in graduate education at McGill and with experience in industry as a recruiter and headhunter of PhDs. Um, and then we also have Mike Chen, who is currently on the market, but he has a lot of experience on today's market and working as a data scientist in various roles. And he switched from astronomy to industry in 2020, 2022. What did I have here? 2025. Okay. And then we also have Henry Neo, who is also giving our presentation, and he um, is the Director of Data Strategy for the Service Transformation Branch in the Ministry of Environment and Parks in BC, which is a very long title. And he also switched from astronomy to industry back in 2020. For our additional speakers who are joining the panel session, we have John Walmsley, who is the executive in residence with the Innovation Center at UVic. And hopefully he can tell us a little bit more about what that means. But he started in physics and has a lot of experience in industry and in hiring. And then we finally have Terrence Tricco, who is not industry. He's actually a tenure track faculty member at the Memorial University of Newfoundland. And so hopefully he can have some thoughts to share on his experience in industry and then maybe coming back to academia. We are very excited to have this wonderful selection of speakers today to talk to us about how we as astronomers can take our astronomy skills in data analysis and looking up tables and looking at pretty pictures and turning this into something that the industry wants to see and will hopefully hire for. And with that, I will let you guys take it away. Thank you again, everyone, for coming and for giving this presentation and helping us make this workshop a success.
Thank you. As I mentioned before, thank you so much for organizing and inviting us. I'm going to share my screen, get us started. Okay. And you see my screen okay? All right, great. I'm on a laptop, so I'm missing all the faces. And thank you for the wonderful introductions. First, Mike, Henry, and I wanted to talk with you a bit about all of those skills that you just mentioned and how we think about going from PhD to industry with the skills mindset. I think the first part that we wanted to convey to you when we're thinking about skills is that during your graduate work, and particularly during a PhD, you really do develop a pool of different skills. So while you do develop expertise, like scientific and technical expertise, which is very valuable, you're also developing a lot of different transferable skills along the way, right? So communication, how do you communicate all of those data to the people that will use them? Things like project management, attention to detail, your analytical thinking. The ability to be able to use all of these skills at once in a meaningful way is what sets you apart. So I always like to start with that. And just to think about it in a way that employers and hiring managers are really counting on you to articulate what you can do to help them further their mission. Henry and Mike, if and whenever you want to jump in, if you have things to add there, please go right ahead. Otherwise, I'm going to move on.
Yeah, I can add on just a little bit in the
Yeah,
sense that
please.
elaborating
Thanks.
on your last point on the current job market, at least for private sector and data science, is quite competitive. So one way to start thinking about it is that there's large volume of applicants and a lot of noise. And so for one, what you want to do is really go back and articulate things, doing the cognitive labor for the hiring team to translate your experience and knowledge for them. Because otherwise, basically, often they go through thousands of resume, especially for recruiters. And so you won't be able to hit those points well for them rather than making them do the work. So that's kind of where the framing is coming from and that.
Yeah, if I think this will come up in one of the later slides as well, but to like to really hammer onto that last point as well, a lot of time the hiring manager or your ma direct supervisor or manager in the workplace is not going to be a technical person. They may not even be a data person. So they really don't know what you mean if you're saying like, you do machine learning or you do this kind of a Bayesian analysis, for example. You will really have to articulate uh, how the skills you have matches the job you're posting and the organization's mission. So like a lot of times the person that writes the job posting is not the person that's doing the evaluation and the hiring. It could be different people. With like someone, yeah. So just wanted to add that.
Yes, those have been my experiences as well. So those are really good points. Thank you. So what types of skills are employers looking for? There are a few different ways we can kind of figure this out along the way. One being through career chats or informational interviews, however you wish to call this, which is really kind of reaching out to someone who's in a role that you might be interested in or working in a company that you might be interested in, just asking them, hey, do you have 30, 40 minutes to chat with me either online or over coffee about, what you do, how you got there. And those are really valuable experiences for learning, about the skills, about the problems that companies are trying to solve, and about the language that they use to talk about the skills they're looking for. Another way that you can learn about this is through internships, if you have opportunities for internships during your studies, as well as job postings, looking at what's currently available, seeing what you might be interested in, and really reading through the skills that they're asking for. And there are also some labor market data available. We'll share just a little bit of that with you. Either of you have anything to add here? Okay, I can see your pictures now, which I couldn't before, so I think this will go more smoothly. Thanks. So just very quickly, we won't go through all of this, but as one example of skills that employers are looking for. So this comes from the Future of Jobs report by the World Economic Forum, meaning that they have surveyed employers globally, asking about skills that they're looking for, what they see on the rise and trends and so on. And the point that we wanted to make here is that transferable skills are a priority for employers globally. So these skills that we mentioned before that you do develop during graduate work, like analytical thinking and creative thinking, um, these types of things. I'll let you look through them later, but just to kind of give you a reference for what we mean when we say transferable skills. Did anyone have other points you wanted to add here?
Yeah, I just want to say like from an HR perspective, like these words are very common. Like they show up in like for example, every single job posting I have posted and hired for has had analytical thinking listed as a competency that is required for the job. So like I think if you Google a lot of these things, you can get exactly what people mean. And sometimes the organization you're applying to, especially if it's a public sector organization, will have rubrics and definitions on their hiring website. So it's useful to know what like what it actually means in from an HR perspective, not just like the common definition or maybe what we might think of when we're thinking of analytical thinking from someone with an astronomy or physics background. It might mean something different than what HR is thinking. So it's a good idea to look up these things.
Yeah, and to add on to that, and resonating with the earlier point, it is good to start chatting with people, networking and actually chatting with people who have gone through these things to see like what kind of skills are transferable from your grad studies. And I think a lot of people would be surprised how many things you do are actually quite highly transferable. And it's good to start thinking ahead of time in terms of, okay, what exactly am I, working on that translates well and being able to put words on it and give language, on that's relevant to the hiring.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Henry. That's great to know about the rubrics. And I had that experience as well when I transitioned from my PhD, and my first job was in industry, and I had been looking for lots of different types of jobs, and I had some skills that they were looking for, and I learned through informational interviews that I was using the wrong words. Like we were talking about the same thing and not connecting because I was using different words than they were. And after I started meeting with different people, I kind of figured that out. So that's really helpful. We have one more slide of some data to share just quickly, but more specific to Canada. So this comes from the skills survey report done by Business and Higher Education Roundtable, where they surveyed employers across Canada. And they asked what are the top skills they're looking for in entry level and mid-career hires. And we can see that, I mean, it's not a surprise, but it's always nice to have data to illustrate when we tell you that employers are looking for a balance of transferable and technical skills. So we see some of those transferable skills, like interpersonal skills, are highly important. People want you to be able to work in a team, and work with other people and collaborate, as well as to be able to communicate. But we can see a bit of a difference of what you would expect in that employers are looking for in like an entry level position where maybe you're using more your technical skills, as opposed to if you're looking to have something more, senior, that there is an expectation to have some of that industry knowledge or experience and some experience in leadership. And I think maybe some of you might have some more to add on the technical skills aspect.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
just commenting on someone who's currently in the job market, and this is more specifically towards private sector and data science. It's most positions often ask for high fit, particularly on the technical skill set. So in terms of getting ahead, so it's good to start chatting with people in industries you may be interested in and see what kind of technical skills certain positions are looking for, and see if potentially you can build your grad studies around it. And to give example, there are, let's say data scientists, there's even different specialty. There's analytic heavy ones, there's experimentation, causal inference heavy one, and there's machine learning heavy ones. And not having necessary focus, particularly the ones that's relevant to the job description, could be hard to compete in the current market. And so just want to point out that while things are highly transferable, technical skills is the initial benchmark, the barrier to go through. And it is good to start thinking about it, given that this is a job market where a lot of people have at least 1 or 2 years experience in the industries already. And so it is good to start thinking about that rather than waiting until, you graduate and suddenly like, oh, I'm in the market, what kind of things can transfer kind of deal. So yeah, I just want to comment on that.
Yeah, I want to point out that if you look at these two columns, like the main change from entry level to mid career is on the entry level side is technical skills and problem solving, the kind of like the doing and making sure you can do the task and achieve the goals. But on the mid career side is leadership and industry knowledge. So it's less about what you can do, but how do you know, like how your team skills fit in with what the industry needs and what your organization needs as an overall. So like it's a lot more strategic. When I joined the public service in the first place, it was as a data scientist. So lots of technical skill and problem solving. It was very much like my postdoc and PhD work, writing code every day, running analysis. But now I probably write code like maybe half a day a month. Uh, and I'm really, my day-to-day is more about trying to figure out how do people use the technical skills so that we can achieve our organization goals. Right? So really need to go over to uh, the technical skills and like being able to do things will get you in the door of a career path, but then afterwards you really need to transition over to the leadership and knowledge side. It becomes more valuable than what you can do. So at the same time, this also means that, like I was saying before, when you are interviewing and being hired, you're going to be interviewed by the mid-career folks who are going to not necessarily have the same technical skills background as you would. So the other transferable skills become really, really important.
Great. Yeah, very true. Henry, I think I'll leave that one to you.
Sorry, had to find my audio button again. Yeah, so this is just an example we put together to kind of think about how we might translate an academic reality into a way you might present it in an interview or on a cover letter. And this is based on like, there were some jobs where I had posted and I had like over 100 PhDs apply to it. And but I would say like a bunch of people had really good backgrounds, but they weren't able to show like how common PhD things were able to translate to the organization's needs, right? So you're thinking back to like the chart that Rebecca had put up a few slides ago with all those terms we said you should Google. Maybe the thing you did like in your PhD work is that you wrote a first author paper on star formation rates, and if you write that into a resume, it would not really mean very much to your reader, or you explain it in an interview. So the way you can translate them into transferable skills is that these are just three examples. Like, you can talk about your interpersonal skills because maybe you work with 8 different collaborators, each with their own personality and motivations, and you had to get everyone to agree to the same paper draft in the end and be happy about it. You probably uh, had to show a lot of leadership because everyone wanted the paper to happen, but like it wouldn't go ahead without you as the first author, right? So you had the final accountability to make it actually happen. So that means you had to make the decisions and set goals for the entire group uh, for that to move forward. And examples like that are really important in public sector and private industry. Uh, and you also can give example where you show resiliency. So maybe, for example, maybe the observing proposal didn't get selected in the first semester that you applied for at the time. So you got the feedback, you applied the feedback, you got some coaching on how to succeed, and you were successful in getting the time you needed the next semester. So that's an example of showing resiliency. Or maybe the first journal you published to did you submitted to didn't accept it, and you had to make a lot of revisions and submit to a different journal. Those are all good examples of resiliency as well.
Yeah, I just want to add that a
Oh,
lot of these Okay, a lot of these are really good details, and we'll talk a little more about the distinction between resume versus interview, and a lot of these details is usually when you tell a story and narrative. For example, how do you actually convince a difficult, quote unquote, stakeholder to take action, including, when you're going through referees, radical referees, in getting your paper published. Those details will become quite important in the interviews. But even on a resume, basically, you can make a bullet points that still imply some of these things, and you can elaborate further when you're in the interview process.
So I think this slide is for us to help you imagine yourself in the employer's shoe and what are they looking for. Okay, so it's just a reminder that a lot of people don't really understand what a graduate education actually means. Like only 9% of people in Canada have a graduate degree and only 1% with a PhD. Uh, and hiring is a risk. Like it takes a lot of time and effort. I think there's one job where for me to hire for it, it took me like a few hours every week for several months in order to get everything together, right? The recruitment process is a long time, putting together offer package, getting together all the onboarding resources. I think usually it takes about a year before a new team member becomes like fully productive on my team. So that's the cost that it is to hire somebody. So then people might be worried, like, what if after all of this, they don't work well on my team or they get bored and they want to leave. So they're not really just looking for experts to join a team. They're looking people to fill the needs towards the employer or organization's goals. And I think this is very different from academia. Like a lot of times you will see like faculty job posted where they're looking for someone in star formation or exoplanets or trans-Neptunian objects. And basically the person, whatever the expertise of the person they hire, that's the direction the department will go, especially if it's a small department. But in like public sector and private sector, it's a lot different, right? Like the business goals are to make money. In the public sector, we want to provide services. some organization like nonprofits out there exist to advocate or to regulate things. So it's not like they're trying to find who's going to be a good expert, and then that person will join a team and shape the mission. They already have a mission, they already have a vision, and you need to show how you can fit into that organization's mission.
Yeah, it's a really important point and something I've experienced in the past, and we'll maybe talk about that in the interviews. But when you have like that initial contact with employers or industry people working there in that space, like they're really looking to know that you understand their needs. Mike, did you have anything to add there?
You can just add a little bit. So some way to frame it, it's thinking in terms of during the interviews or even during when you're writing a resume, a lot of time what hiring is looking for is what can you bring to the table kind of deal. And so you want to sell yourself, market yourself in such a way that you already say like, oh, hey, look, this is your job description. This is the needs of your company and the team. This is what I can bring to the table. So a lot of the work towards marketing yourself is being able to frame your experience and who you are in that framework.
Yes, very much so. Okay, so at this point, we're going to move a little bit from thinking about our skills to thinking about how we can market them well in our resumes and also a bit in our interviews. I think, Mike, that's
Yeah, and so as we move on to interview, I'll just kind of reiterate the point that often recruiters have to go through a large volume of applications. And these days in particular, unfortunately, there is AI enablement where there's a lot of AI slaps. And so ironically, while a lot of these resumes, AI-assisted resumes can speak the industry language, they often end up being a lot of corporate fluff. So what you want to think about is how do you stand out? How do you actually increase the signal to noise ratio and compete against it? And so on the right, just kind of showing basically there's eye tracking scanner of where recruiters' eyes usually spend on a resume, and just showcase that it's usually quick skimming, and thinking about where their eyes goes and how they look through a resume will also help you figure out okay how to structure your resume well so it pick up it's easy to read, it's easy to digest, and rather than the recruiter spending like a few seconds like no I'm going to throw this resume out, at least you can go move on to the next round and secure interviews. Feel free to add anything.
okay. Henry, you're good.
Yeah, I'm good.
Yes. Mike, those are good points because I do recall reviewing a lot of resumes, and when you're doing so many at once, it's so important to just be able to have it be clear and not be wondering like, what do they mean when they wrote that? So it's really helpful. So here we have just some general advice for resumes for most non-academic positions, and we'll get into a bit more specifics afterward. So generally, as opposed to a CV, which encompasses everything, your resume would be 1 to 2 pages that targets only your most relevant experiences, meaning that you've really looked at the posting, you understand the company and the problems they're trying to solve, and you've really positioned your resume to respond to that. So you want to be able to, you want to tailor your resume for each job posting that you're applying for and use the language of the industry. So using the language from the posting, as long as it's true, right? You never want to put yourself in a position where you're, yeah, where you're stating things beyond what you can do because that will come out later. Did you have anything to add there, Mike, as I go through points or?
Yeah, I might as well add a little bit. So regarding 1 or 2 pages, I think for most people going, initially transitioning to the private sector for data science, 1 page is recommended in the sense like usually the only people who can justify 2 pages are people with 10 years of career and more specifically career relevant to the job posting kind of deal. And so going back to the notion that hiring have to go through a large volume of applications, 1 page is usually more than enough kind of deal. And regarding to contextualizing things, no, I think I don't have too much to add there, Rebecca. I think we covered that pretty well.
Great, thanks. Just wanted to check in. So you also want to make sure that you're quantifying things, right? And instead of listing publications, you would just kind of, unless you're really applying for a position where they're looking to know that you published specific things, kind of just quantifying like how many articles you did or how many maybe international conferences you spoke at, things like that, and aiming to have a resume that's result oriented, because you want to be able to demonstrate with specific examples actions that you took to show that you can use your skills. And lastly, often in these types of roles, employers are more concerned about your experience and how you can articulate that, and checking in on your education at the end.
Yeah, and just going back a little bit into quantification, well, actually specifically towards publication, it's a lot of industry roles actually doesn't care that much about publication. So often end up being mostly just almost a footnote, like you can put out a quick number, but you don't really need to elaborate beyond that because most positions probably don't care much about it. It's more about these are quantifiable results I've delivered kind of situation. And a little bit actually going back to making sure, when you use a language that's true, one way to frame it is think about can you defend it if an interviewer brings it up during the interview? So they put in a resume like, hey, you said you've done this thing, talk about it. So if you don't feel comfortable that you can defend it in the interview, then don't put it down kind of situation. So that's usually my rule. And in terms of the last point in the order, yeah, I would say experience first, and I will actually, touch upon that a little more. And then education, usually it's good at the end. Like for me, often it's literally just PhD, and sometimes you probably don't even need to put when you're finished kind of situation. Unless I think the only thing is if you're already applying for a job before you're graduating, it'd be good to point out when you're expected to graduate. Because in those cases, a lot of times hiring team want to know, are you available when they need you kind of situation. And also thinking about risk of would you accept the offer? Because maybe you decided like, oh, I still have, some grad school to finish. I don't want to jump ship yet. And so that's another risk calculation you have to make. And so in terms of education, if you haven't graduated yet, it's still good to put down when you're projecting to finish.
Great, yeah, good points. I know you have some other points about resumes, so I'll let you go ahead.
Yeah, so building on top of that, I think one framework to look at how to approach resume, it's the notion show, don't tell. And what that means is being specific and back up by your specific experience with details, as opposed to often, for example, people will use summary, and summary on a resume is not necessarily bad, but they can come off generic because I have 3 year experience in machine learning, and I am an expert doing analytics. And it's like, okay, that sounds good. It's probably true given your background, but how do you differentiate from other people, and how can we actually believe you when those are just simple words kind of deal? And so before jumping to how do you actually build these specific, I want to point out that often I think a lot of concerned questions feeling like they don't actually have work experience. But I want to point out, especially from the transferable skill point of view, master's, PhD, and even volunteer work, those are work. And as long as you don't use the technical words like employment, especially for like volunteer work, those are fine. And you want to actually frame it in a way that's relevant to job posting. So if job posting is looking for, say, experimentation related things, if you can order it, you want to order the bullet points accordingly. And usually, of course, chronologically have the most recent job near the top, but not always necessarily depending on the how well it speaks to the job itself. And so moving on into the specific sample, by the way, maybe I should pause to see if Rebecca and Henry have anything to add to that part. Okay.
Not right now.
Yeah. And so in terms of some examples of specifics, you want to be able to comment for each bullet point on, for example, the methods or the tools you used. And if it's more technical driven, you can specifically put in words like you use Python, use SQL, or machine learning, use random forest to solve a certain problem. The other part is you want to be able to quantify the things like data size or the value. And so you can say, if you are dealing with structured data table, you can say 3 million rows from 3 sources. Or if sometimes, say, a lot of astronomical data may not be that impressive in terms of size, depending on the collaboration you work with, you can say like, it's, about $0.5 million worth of data. And one way to look at it is looking at the operational budget of your observatory and then see how many hours you have. You can kind of work that out. You also want to talk about the context for collaboration, because one important transferable skill is the ability to work with other people, especially often cross-functional collaboration with different kind of team members. So you can comment on what's the size of team that you work with, what are each teammate's role, for example, are the engineers, are the equivalents of project managers, and so forth. And so you can start thinking about, obviously, most of our collaborators are scientists, but some of them do have more, say, engineering role. Your PhD or master's advisor are effectively more of project manager. So you can start thinking about using industry language in those sense. There's also who and how often communicate with. So give an example, how do we report to the managers? Does it happen weekly? Does it happen bi-weekly? And also you have experience in chatting with like say director level role or C-suite equivalent that could be useful. And again, you want to speak it towards the job description. Some of them are maybe more mid-career, some of them may be more entry level. So you want to basically be cherry pick the experience you have and then tailor towards it. Going back quantify the result, you want to frame it in a way that speaks towards impact. And often in private sector is about what's the business equivalent impact, which could be hard to talk about. But even things like, for example, you reduce modeling time from 3 months to 10 hours, that has financial values in the sense that it used to be labor intensive and expensive. And you've done something, say, with machine learning and you automate it, and suddenly you can reduce that significantly. So those are the language that a lot of hiring team, even a non-technical person, can understand quite well. And also it's a way to showcase that you understand the needs of the team, the job description, rather than like, oh, hey, I have a PhD, I have like, a lot of good technical skills. And so I would say that's a pretty important part of it. And the very last part is being able to always communicate impact. Why is it important? And understand that could be difficult sometimes because like, oh, well, science is important, knowledge is important. But going back to, for example, reducing the modeling time is recognizing that it is financially very important. You save a lot of costs. So that's one way to frame it. And so that one is very positioned in different like domain industry dependent. And that's where it's good again to do information interviews or reading job description to get a sense like what are the things that may fit you better given your current grad school studies, work project, or even volunteer work. Yeah.
Thanks, Mike. Henry, did you have anything to add there?
I think I'll speak to it in the next slide.
Yeah, great. Okay.
Yeah, so we want to introduce this concept that you may have come across before is the STAR or SOAR stories concept of presenting your skills and your experience. So it's an acronym. It stands for situation and then task or obstacle, action, and then results and reflection. And you can Google this as well. There's lots of examples, and you can use this to think about how you structure your resume. But you can also use it for interview questions. So, for example, in the BC Public Service, this is the way you are instructed to present your answers to interview questions that are behavioral interview questions. So these are about your competency, and typically you can think about it as an answer to a question like, "Tell me about a time when something happened." Like, when you and a teammate disagreed on a methodology to be used, how do you resolve that? So that's how you would frame this. And you can kind of think about this like a paper. When you start drafting out your answer in your head or on paper before, as you prep for the interview, you want to start with the action, right? That's like that's your results. Not results, the data part of your paper, right? What actions you personally took, the methods you took, and you need to make sure that this is really the main part of your statement. You're going to spend like at least half your time talking about the actions and really be clear on what you did and how the ideas came up with. So, for example, did you decide on this methodology? Did you consult with your supervisor? Did your supervisor give you the main idea and you refined it? And then when you know that action, you can come back and think, okay, well, how do you want to frame this as the task or obstacle? And also the situation. Like, so the S and the T is kind of like the introduction part of a paper. The S is like the background literature review. So once you decide what your story is going to be about in the action, you decide all the details you need to give to make the actions understood. You don't want to like give all the context. You don't need to explain to the interviewer how observatories work or anything like that. You just need to figure out what you what do they need to know background knowledge wise in order to understand the impact of your action? And then you end the situation with the one sentence task or obstacle. That's like your thesis statement. Uh, and then at the very end, it's also really important to do that result and reflection where you, like Mike was saying, talking about the quantifier results of your actions. And in the interview setting, it's really good to think about what the reflections are. And you look at the bullet points below, like it's really important to think about it beyond just the exact specific questions. So like going back to the example of, there's a conflict on like disagreement about methodology. How do you resolve that conflict? I find that a lot of times people who are newer from academia will really focus on like, okay, well, we look at the pros and cons and we decided, we look at the pros and cons, we decided what our goals were, and we picked the option that matches the most pros and or something that we all can agree on, or we did some testing and we found that that was a logical answer. But really, in a team setting, you also want to think about like, it's not just about how you got it, like what the answer was, but how you manage your interpersonal relationship when you get there. Like a lot of time people are missing like, okay, what do you do to ensure you still have a good working relationship with the team member that you disagreed with? Like, or how do you handle the disagreement in a way that people still want to work with you? So that kind of it is also really important. And then just one last thing about what would the public sector spend on things? In public sector roles, like including the NRC and the Hertzberg Institute, right? We're really required to hire based on like very objective and rubric-based scoring patterns. So a lot of times we're not able to score you any points unless you actually say it explicitly in the interview or in your resume. So going back, like Mike mentioned in the last point, it's really important to use the job language and really be clear that what you're saying matches what they're looking for. Because we basically have a checklist and a rubric, and we listen to your answer and we look at your resume and we tick things off and give you points. And even if we know that you could do it, but you didn't say it, we can't score the points. And this is a more public sector issue than everything, but it's important to keep in mind if you're thinking about federal or provincial government careers. Yeah, Mike or Rebecca, anything else you want to add?
Yeah, not too much. I think that's very comprehensive. And I think just kind of a reminder that it is a storytelling in the sense that you do want to tell a story that basically answers the question of what the job description is asking for, drawn from your experience. And so the star structure definitely is both applicable for resume as well as interview. For resume, because you are working with bullet points, it would be far more condensed. And so it's more of something you think about. And interviews where you really flesh out a story and speak towards it. And so, yeah. But this is very comprehensive. Thank you, Henry.
Yes. I think we just have, we're just wrapping up. We just have a few things to say about interviews. So generally, there can be multiple stages of interviews. So I just wanted to kind of highlight a bit of the differences. Often an initial interview or even a screening call that might be done by someone else, like a hiring manager or recruiter, can often be just to gauge your motivations. Do you know about the company? Why do you want to work there? Are you just looking for a job, or are you genuinely interested in moving their mission forward? And to know if you can communicate clearly and concisely. So they'll be asking you questions to know like if you can kind of answer them in the way that they're expecting and not just talk for 20 minutes about some random other thing. And just to know like an initial way to kind of get to know you, to know like do they understand my company and do they have a good grasp of the role. Following that, secondary or other interviews can do those things, but also they want to learn about how you behave in a role or a team. So this is kind of why we wanted to share the SOAR framework, because that's really what those questions are designed for. They see your resume, they see all these action-oriented bullets that you have, and they think, wow, this person looks really great, and like they might be able to help us with what we're trying to do, but I really need to know that they can work with my team. And this is what those questions are getting at. And also to see if you can apply your skills in a way that will match their needs, right? So they're going to ask you about different things that you had on your resume, and those behavioral questions, tell me about a time. Henry already covered that, so I'll let that one be. Did anyone have anything else to add here? Okay.
Yeah, so just thinking about the employer's perspective again, and I think we mostly talk about these things. I won't go too much into it as we're short on time, but uh, just a reminder that that tell me about a time question is really about trying to figure out what your past performance was like, so you can gauge what your future performance will be, uh, and that is really important to have that transferable skill because the technical things specific to each team can be very specific. So not having exactly that is not as big of a deal as not having those transferable skills that we want you to have.
Yeah, this is something that I've seen. I've worked somewhere where I did research with employers who hired PhDs, and finding themes of common perceptions, misperceptions, and some of them I already spoke to already. And what you just mentioned, Henry, is definitely one of them. I know you're smart. I know you can learn things. I can train you how to use this tool or this methodology, but I really need to know that you can collaborate because those are some things that I just cannot teach. Okay, so I think just some last thoughts, and we want to have lots of time for questions. Um, you can always go back to the slides, but as you leave, we're hoping that you'll um, also, be thinking about the context of industry hiring and knowing that when you see job ads that they're not perfect. Sometimes they can be a wish list, at least in industry and in the public sector. I know, Henry, you spoke to kind of very specific and strict requirements. So that might be a bit different, and it's really good to know about. But you don't always need 100% of the posting to apply. I think I know, Mike, you mentioned that this can also depend on the current labor market and how many people are out there with the skills that you have. So those things you can judge as you go along. And to know that job titles can fluctuate. So really pay attention to the skills that they're asking for. To be honest, I've recruited for roles where they were hiring in a data science role. They had a job title. We found a really good candidate that they wanted to hire this person. And this person said, yeah, I'm interested, but it's really important to me that my title be this other thing. And the company was like, fine, do it. So it's just to let you know that you really want to be paying attention to the skills they're asking for in the posting, and that sometimes employers know exactly what they want and what they need, and sometimes it's not always the case. And interviews are a really great place for you to gain that clarity, and to make sure that everyone knows the problem that are trying to be solved and what it takes to solve those problems. Lastly, just to keep an open mind about the types of roles that you might be able to do. I know we spoke about data science roles, but there are people with science PhDs that go on to do all different types of roles. There are some publicly available data from different Canadian universities where you can explore those a little bit more. And yeah, it's really rare that a job title is going to be specific to your research. So just keep an open mind, and know that you have space to enjoy lots of things that you want to do. And that might be in work and it might be outside of work. And you'll have space to do that. Henry, Mike, I will let you chime in also with some final things if you like.
Yeah, I just want to say that like I was in this position too. Like a lot of times when we're really invested a lot of our life into astronomy research and academia, it really feels like that's a big part of our identity. Like, I am an astronomer, and it could feel very like disorienting when you're like thinking about yourself outside of academia and outside of astronomy. So, I think, but at the same time, like the second bullet point, like we are more than our jobs. So, even if the thing you do in your day-to-day work is not like you don't feel like you identify with as your identity, that's only like a few dozen hours a week, right? Like you can have many, many more hours to do other things you like in life and really be part of your identity. You can volunteer, you can find other ways to fulfill yourself outside of your job as well.
Yeah, and just some, last thing to add is this is a very short presentation, so obviously we can cover everything. And so resume interview on its own could easily be its own workshop kind of deal. So hopefully this empowers you all to start thinking, ahead, thinking about like what jobs you'd be interested in the industries, and also start thinking about how do you use the industry language, so thinking about what your experience look like as well as kind of start building projects that may be more aligned with what you want in these kind of careers kind of situation. So yeah, hopefully the presentation provides a good overview of that, and obviously we'll have more Q&A coming up to answer more in details and follow-ups.
Yeah, thank you. I'll let the hosts let us know if they want us to stop sharing or put any slides back.
Hi. Thank you for your wonderful presentation. You can feel free to stop sharing at this point, and Andre is going to moderate the questions, so I will step back.
Thanks, Brianna. Yeah, thank you everyone for the presentation. That was really great. Yeah, so all of our participants, feel free to drop questions in the chat as we'll wait for those to build up. We have a few from our email submissions, so I can read some of these off to everyone on the panel, and then we can chime in if you feel like you have something to contribute. So the first one, I guess, is kind of a big picture question that you touched on a bit in the presentation, which is how do we change our academic mindset to that of industry? I know you talked about nobody cares about like star formation rates in tech role, but like, what are some other tips you might have for switching that mindset into a way that is helpful for applying to tech jobs and things like that?
I guess I could chime in first. So again, acknowledge that I'm more familiar with private sector in data science. And so a lot of jobs in that case is fairly business driven, business oriented. And so something that I need to start getting used to is in terms of how do you translate something in terms of business impact kind of deal. And it could be, for example, you need to drive strategy of data to say growth the business kind of deal. And so some of those does take a lot of work, and I do find that to be the most challenging part when it comes to crafting a resume. It's how do I speak some of the academic results impact in a way that is relevant to business. And so that is specifically private sector. But yeah, I think that is one thing in terms of switching some of those mindset is to start understanding what some of these jobs actually do and what it looks like. And the part, of course, we've already mentioned about it's recognizing there's actually a lot of transferable skills we're already developing. Some of them are indeed rare. For example, the ability to speak publicly, for example, the ability to distilled complex, technical insights into something that a layperson can talk about, especially if you have, for example, outreach, kind of public talk experience. Often there are executive members who may not have, technical backgrounds, but they do want to understand what the insights we get, is this reliable? And the ability to speak towards that is quite important. So the other part of the framework, the mindset is simply being able to recognize a lot of transferable skills you already have and understand what their values are and how to, frame your story accordingly. And I think an example is, for example, for people who have tried to publish paper, have published paper, dealing with a difficult referee is a very important skill in a sense. Like you always need to convince, it doesn't matter how good your data, how good your results are. If you aren't able to convince your team members or basically your boss or executives to take actions, then it becomes useless. And so some of the things to basically start reframing your mindset or industry, I think that's another thing that's very useful and kind of underlooked for a lot of academics transitioning.
Maybe Andre, I got it. If I can add to that, first of all, I wanted to say I thought that the presentation that we saw already was excellent. It shows a really gives a nice coverage of the topics that, and I felt surfaced a lot of important items. On this particular one, I just wanted to paint a little bit of a picture. So, so all this conversation has been centered on astronomy students with your data analysis skills, and there may be some people on here who are instrumentation people, and we can talk about that as well. But just using the example of the data analysis, imagine you're in the interview and you're a volunteer, you're right. So you volunteer, maybe you volunteer in some soccer league or some membership organization within the community where people are supposed to pay their fees, and you decide to pull up the database, do an analysis to show who's paid their fees and who's not, or what barriers there are. You discover some insight from something very mundane. In interview and on your resume, you can point out that you have these deep analytical skills, but you just like to analyze data, and you applied your skill in this very mundane area, and you got this insight which was useful to the organization. And suddenly you've moved from another PhD data analysis astronomer into someone who loves doing data analysis and is willing to do, almost trivial work because they're motivated by the outcomes that come from that data analysis. Suddenly the interviewer is going to be, it's going to make you stand out, I would suggest. So an example, a way of doing this is how to broaden your experience and applying your skills in other domains that shows that you mean it when you say you like doing data analysis, rather than you ended up in this PhD and it turns out you had a whole lot of data to analyze, which you did, and then you wrote your thesis.
Yeah, it's a very good point. I might as well take the time to add a little bit to it in terms of when I finally made a major breakthrough for my resume, it's actually taking my volunteer experience put up front as work experience. And so in my case, basically, I found a climate NGO that does a lot of work and basically recognizing that there are a lot of things we can do, in this case, optimizing campaign strategy. So I use basically open source data from the census data, took a leadership recognizing what kind of value it has to provide, and then basically apply that to the problem. And that one ended up being a lot easier, I think, to translate into what a lot of job descriptions are, because in data science, that's equivalent of basically growth or go-to-market equivalents of data science. And that does actually gets away from some problems where, unfortunately, I think a lot of technical skills we have, they're impressive. I think most hiring would think that they're impressive. But what does it look like in terms of business relevant? It's hard to see. And so, yeah, I think John made a very good point in terms of even small things, showing initiative, showing that you can translate beyond simply, astrophysics, for example, goes a long way. And yeah, being able to start, building that before you enter the job market, I think is highly valuable rather than, spending the next 6 months unemployed trying to build it up kind of deal.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. I see a few questions in the chat sort of about the interview process. So we have one from Adrienne. What is the usual timeline between the applicant sending their application in, the job interview, and the first day of work?
Depends how well organized the company and organization is. Honest to God, I think I probably went some. Previously, I hired a lot of people, and we were a busy consulting organization, and our processes were only so good. So it could be it kind of was a bit of a hazing. And if you were willing to stick with the process to the end, then you were probably willing to work within the consulting environment. So it could be 9 months, right? That you should. It depends, and you need to be like we were a consulting organization doing a variety of work. We never really were sure what we were going to be doing in a month's time. So we didn't do it on purpose, but it did reflect our culture. Whereas if you didn't like that, you weren't going to stick with that recruiting process. You're gonna, these guys aren't organized. They don't know what they're doing. I don't want to work there. Whereas if somewhere's a lot more organized, I'm going to let Henry talk about what the public service process is, which is well managed, I imagine, but still takes time. And then maybe someone else has an experience of, the fastest I would think is 3 months, right? There's to feasibly be interviewed, run through all the cycles. There's a desperate need for you at any company. The fastest that could be is 3 months. And anyway, maybe Henry will prove me wrong.
Yeah, I only have public service hiring experience, so it's because we have lots of laws and policies on what we have to do, and also like waiting periods, like criminal record checks, and like time for people to hear the results, and then internal union members can like see the results and they have a time to seek feedback. And if the way we give the feedback indicates that maybe the competition was not run fairly, there's a time for them to object to it and seek like a higher level review from the merit commissioner or other places too. So it takes time.
Yeah,
So
I think oh, go ahead, please.
Oh, I just want to add a counterpoint to that. It really depends on the size of the organization to some degree. If you're, a thousand, multiple thousand people organization, there's gonna be a lot more policies and red tape around everything they do. I do a lot of work with startup companies, and if you're with, interviewing with a company that's a dozen people, a couple dozen people, they could hire, have
Yeah.
everything done in a couple of weeks.
And if it's a very small company, you run into someone who has a problem. Because remember, and this back to the earlier point of looking for a problem to be solved. This is what the manager's doing. If you turn up and you're flexible, for instance, you don't need a full-time job. You're willing to work part-time, and for a startup where the job may not continue for a long time, purely for the basis of building your experience and doing a project, you can start that day.
Yeah, I was just going to add that I think there is indeed a very large spread, both across industries and across organization size. And so, from personal experience, I would say it could be as quick as 2 months. So, there's one where it's about 1 week before I submit an application to the initial screening, less than a month until basically I get to the final rounds, and basically heard back that they've picked another candidate. And then, based on what they're looking for, because some companies do actually want someone to be able to hit the ground running pretty quickly. And so the ones that offers made and accepted, it could be as short as 2 or 3 weeks kind of deal, dependent situation. And then there's opposite end spectrum where basically submit the resume and for whatever reason they delayed it. And I heard back 3 months later, it's like, hey, would you like an interview? And so we really there's a lot of variation. And even for the same company, it's very often could be team dependent as well. And so yeah, there's not really a standard answer.
Great. Another question from Ariane. What can increase your chances to reach the interview step? Last session, it was mentioned to reach out to people on LinkedIn or other networking. Should we reach out to HR team members on someone with a similar role to what we are applying to? And how much does this kind of thing matter?
I can
Oh,
share some initial thoughts
please
quickly.
go ahead. Please go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just initial thoughts. Because I think it's also important to differentiate. Like we talked a bit about networking, and really, I always like to highlight like talk to as many people as you can, build your network. Like most people find their jobs through their network. There are a lot of jobs that are not even ever posted. It's like, oh, but I know someone that can do this, and oh, I know someone that might be good at this. So I always want to encourage that. But there's a difference between networking, you ask someone to learn about their company, and like reaching out to specifically for this question. And you framed that question very well. So it's, uh, that's a different thing. But what I wanted to say is when you do those coffee chats and those interviews, it's definitely not the time to ask for a job. Like if you're actively looking, you want to let your network know, and you want like your whole network to know, like, I'm applying for things. Thanks, for chatting with me. If ever you hear something, I would love, let me know. But it's not appropriate to ask for a job at that point. However, if you're following up on resume that you've already submitted, at least in the time when I was recruiting, which was about 5 years ago, it was perfectly acceptable to reach out to someone on the HR team or who's doing the recruitment, to a very brief message. Really excited about this position. I sent you this. If you have like further questions or want to know other things, I would be happy to chat with you at your convenience. Um, as far as reaching out to people like in similar roles, I think it would depend. I'm not always sure that that's really the person that's going to be able to move it for you, but if it's a smaller company and they're looking for someone to join their team, I've also seen that happen. Even in the public sector, actually. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Henry. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely want to edit it. So like when I hire in the public sector, I get lots of emails from people saying like, "Oh, I submitted your application. My application. I hope you see it and stuff." And it's nice. Like I like it's like good initiative, but it doesn't end up making a difference a lot of times. Like Rebecca said, uh, the appropriate time to network is before you submit the application, not after you already submitted it. But just so you know as well, like uh, in the public sector, we don't even see your application until the job closes. So you submitted it and the job's still open. I can't even look at it. It goes to HR first for filtering before I see it. Uh, and a lot of times when we do that screening before we get to the interview stage, we hide out the names. So I don't even see names or anything. I just see the description of yourself, and what I usually get is a spreadsheet, and one of the columns is the name, and it gets hidden. And then I see your answers to the questions that are asked in the application, and I just rate every question meets requirements or not. And anyone who doesn't have a meet requirement in every single column gets filtered out. And then at that point, after that, is when I can see people's names and reach out to schedule interviews or written assignments or that kind of stuff. So, like in the public sector, like the idea of merit is really important, and transparency, and like not having someone get a job because they know them or something like that, because it's taxpayers' money, right? We have to be really accountable. And also every single email that gets sent gets filed away, and for 2 years it gets locked up in this special place in government records that can be audited in the future. So like everything that comes in, those emails are nice, but it also means that it's an extra email I have to file into my my government records folder. That said, there are other hiring opportunities in the public sector that are not like so formal and rigid. So sometimes there's like short-term contracts. So like this whole formal process is really for full-time permanent jobs. And once you have a permanent job in government, it's basically like tenure. Like you have to do something illegal to get fired, essentially, right? So so those are hard to get, and they're very scrutinized in the hiring process. But in terms of like what John was saying, sometimes you're willing to work part-time, or like a 9-month contract, you're covering someone on leave or something. Those are often called auxiliary position in the government. They usually come with no benefits. You get extra pay instead, and so that you don't get like some of the permanent employee benefits. So it's a little bit different, but and no job protection essentially, right? So those kind of roles can be hired with less formality. So sometimes someone is happy to hire. We as long as you meet the requirements, we can hire you. So a lot of times that's a good way people get the first job in government, and then they transition and then compete for a permanent job after that.
Yeah, and to bring it a little to what's mentioned last career session, it's that some people point out about 80% of jobs aren't actually openly advertised kind of situation. And I think the utility of networking and securing interview was far higher in that place, whereas in the openly advertised one, for example, is already very competitive. And the market is also changing in such a way that even if you got a referral, unless the person who's referring to have already worked with you before and can comment specifically on things, referral mostly just means your resume will be guaranteed to be viewed by the recruiter, and that's about it, which technically goes a long way when the market is flooded with resumes and applications. But it's not quite the same as even 5 years ago, where referral may actually means almost a guarantee for interview kind of situation. But in terms of the job that isn't openly posted, I think that's where referral, for example, would go a really long way. And I think we also see a shift in the job market where, because a lot of small companies are so overwhelmed with large pool of applicants, they'd rather go through routes where they know someone who already kind of done some quality filtering for them already. And so that's where basically networking goes a long way. And I think the other point to make is that networking is ultimately a long-term game and is built on genuine personal relationship kind of deal. And so one thing I think I wish have done differently is letting my network, people already know, for example, astronomers who went into industries a year before into the job market, because often like they may not be hiring right now, but if they have you on the mind and position came up, so their hiring manager was like, oh yeah, we may want to create this position, then they could probably think of you and let you know to apply and so forth. Or they may even create a position with you in mind kind of situation. And so when it comes to networking and increasing interview opportunity, I would say you'll be more in those hidden job market, which apparently is majority of jobs. And also it is a long-term game in the sense that it's built on genuine long-term relationship, and you do want to start talking about it early kind of deal. And of course, the networking is not transactional, and so that's another thing. It is genuinely based on like human relationship. So network early would definitely do well, but it's a long game.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
I'd love to hear from Terrence, the startup.
Yeah, I just want to echo networking and something Rebecca had put in the slides about when you're networking with people, you're having these conversations, you're learning their language, you're learning their terminology. And that's so invaluable because then you can use that terminology in your resume. Like, and it was mentioned, take language from the job posting, but like, you know, the terminology, you're confident that you're using the right terminology because you've had all these conversations in the past. That also helps you in the interview stage when you secure an interview, because you're going to a room, you're having a conversation about this topic. You've already had a dozen conversations or half a dozen conversations with people in that sphere. And so you know how to talk the language. And, you know, a lot of hiring is like, if you look like a duck and you quack like a duck, then you're the duck we want to hire, I guess. So, you know, that all these things are like, I think Henry said, like it after you've submitted the resume, there's not much you can do, but there's a lot that you can do beforehand to prepare for it.
That was really, I really like that, Terrence. That hit one of my points that I was going to say is when I'm looking for work myself, I have a narrative of, again, how, and I think Terrence put it really well, of how I'm the duck that they're looking for. And that's a hard for people who have never operated. If someone's looking for a astronomical data scientist, it's very easy. You know exactly what that look duck is like, and even if you personally don't feel it in your heart, you can be that person. But if you're in a different domain that you don't know so well, it's very hard to create that narrative up front, and you can go through a lot of interviews learning it. And so, what Terrence just said, at the networking, practicing, listening to people, understanding what they're the sorts of what sorts of characteristics do you look for in a role like this? What sorts of jobs do you often have? Are great questions. And then, of course, the most important question after a networking or informational interview is, who else do you think I should talk to? Because you're just wanting to build your experience of having the conversation many, many times. So when you meet in the interview, you're extremely familiar to the interviewer, and they recognize you for the duck that they're looking for.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Another question from the chat from Foreste. How does the hiring team feel about using AI on resume or cover letters? The question on everyone's mind.
I'm happy to jump in on this one because I have lots of thoughts about AI in this space. And I'm very focused on like data science and that field specific, that very technical field. I mean, data science is AI. They're very, very synonymous nowadays. It's not exactly a perfect Venn diagram overlap, but AI is just pervading data science very, very strongly these days. So, you know, they want to see AI. They want to see that you can use AI. I think you should be using AI to its full benefit. You should never say, hey, make my resume, please. That's going to backfire. They will see that you know you've done no effort whatsoever. But I think you should definitely take your handcrafted, well edited, planned out to the job resume and put that through AI to further refine it and get feedback, right? Um, so that's
That
I
was
think
that was get feedback, Terrence, right? It was not ask it to edit for you, make it better. It was to say, give me feedback on this and tell me where I need to improve.
yeah.
And to add to that point, in terms of the feedback, I think it's quite good in terms of learning the language of the job. I think that's what AI has been quite good at. I would say my experience of using AI when, basically you getting comments on the resume, it's just fairly inconsistent. And also, I don't think you quite, understand that, again, there are quite a big variation between what the teams are looking for, and it's not something you know ahead of time. And so do also take grain of salt when it's commenting on things beyond that. And also, in terms of inconsistency, in terms of fit, some AIs could say like, "Oh yeah, you look like you're a really good fit." The other ones may not. And also, there's the thing you have to be careful about, especially for like models like ChatGPT, as they tend to be very affirming. So sometimes they actually may say things that aren't necessarily helpful, just like, "Oh yeah, your resume looks like a high fit, given your background, blah blah blah." And so I would say, yeah, use critical mind when it comes to AI. But the main point is that yeah, do your work and diligence first. Being able to speak specific to your story paints a realistic picture, and that should help you distinguish yourself quite a bit from a lot of AI slop, which is the average, I think, application these days.
Something else that you can use AI for in this process is helping you prepare for an interview, right? You can say, here's the job ad, here's some information about the company. Give me 10 questions to help prepare. right? I mean, prior to, 5 years ago and previous, people would Google what are some interview questions, and you'd find the most generic questions. But now AI can really help you make questions that are very appropriate to the role. So trying to use AI as like that tool in that sense can be helpful too.
Do also be mindful like AI also regresses to the mean. So if the job you're looking for is fairly specific and different than the average, then AI could fail on those parts. So yeah, do again keep in mind critically in terms of what the limits of AI are. But for a lot of job positions, because they are, by volume generic enough, yes, AI does do a pretty good job tailored towards the specific domain and towards specific role.
Yeah, and like I'll just add one very small point. Like you have a PhD, people are hiring you for your brain, right? So like don't farm out your thinking to the AI. Even if you ask it, like help me prepare for an interview, it should be like ask it, have it ask you questions, and then you think of the response. Don't ask it to generate responses for you, because then you're just, losing your own analytical critical thinking ability, which is what people are interested in.
Yeah, great points, everyone. Thank you. We have a few more questions from the email form. Um, this one is about how can we market ourselves to target a specific industry that we're interested in, for example, climate, and how kind of difficult is it to target one industry?
I'll share some initial thoughts and let others jump in, especially if you're thinking about a specific like a specific industry. It's really helpful to do a little bit of that like research on your own ahead of time and see like we where are those jobs? Like, do they exist where I live or where I'm willing to move? I think that that's one thing people don't always consider in the beginning is kind of understanding like the layout of the labor market and where jobs exist and where they don't. And if you're really interested in something specific, like I'll go back to the network. Just talk to some of the like LinkedIn is a great place to find people who are in positions you might be interested in. You use your judgment there, like have a reason to reach out and appropriately. Your alumni networks are also a really great way to connect with people and kind of have an excuse where you already have something to connect you. Like we both went here. I'm really interested in what you do. But I think the best way to learn about that is to help just talk to people and help build yourself a bit of a network and what you're interested in, and you'll be able to learn more about it.
Yeah, so if you're trying to get into climate, for instance, so uh, the first question is why did you do a PhD in astronomy? And so that's a question to answer. And then the answer is, I was interested in astronomy, but I realized I want to be applying my skills to the benefit of this planet rather than understanding others, or whatever your answer needs to be. Then, as Rebecca says, it's looking at the network. One example is to look like anyway, a bigger point I think would be to look at your previous graduates from your group. Where did they go? Who employed them? That's a really clear signal of an employer who gets what your group does and sees it as employable. So I would like if I were just looking for a job, that's where I would start. But in terms of climate, you're not having to, I think you want to brand yourself as someone who's motivated by climate, and so you're going to you're looking for employers, looking for organizations that are working in that space, and you can decide, exactly what do you mean by climate. Um, you know, an interesting area is heavy industry has the biggest carbon footprint. Do you want to go into there and reduce its carbon footprint, or are you interested in advocacy, or are you looking to advance? Do you want to go work for BC Hydro to help with their to do data analysis for them and their as they look to increase or manage the use of electrical power. You want to create some lenses, explore a roadmap of potential directions that you're headed in. Then, yeah, turning up at events where those people are and being bright-eyed and willing and explaining, oh, yes, you love doing data analysis, you're really looking to make an impact. you're volunteering with these organizations, or you're doing these works separately. Maybe depending on your nature, maybe you're doing analysis and finding ways to get published in the literature that's associated with that industry. These are all it's just generally expanding and broadening your your surface awareness, or the surface of you within that climate space. So that's a lot of unpaid work, and so the right time to do it would be while you're busy doing something else as well. One of the things that's tricky, and I've run into this sometimes. Oh, I'm a PhD is a big thing to pull off, and finding time for other work during that is tricky. But it's so much easier to get a job fresh out of your previous engagement, whatever it was. And so if you can do the groundwork before you graduate, and of course, I think a PhD graduation declared date is a thing of flexibility, so there may be ways to work with that. But doing some of this work starting now, if indeed climate is where you're interested, helps. So when the time comes, you now know you've talked to people, you know the stories, you know the way they think about things, you know the sorts of employment there is, the jobs that are potentially permanent long-term jobs, you know where contract work is, you know where volunteer activities are. And I would say, having known all that, you want to imagine, if you think of climate as, working in climate as you're at the mountain that you're headed towards, thinking about what are the steps that take you towards that mountain, whether it's some level of free volunteering that gives you exposure to a network and demonstrates the applicability of your skills within that world, or whether it's a short-term contract with a startup that doesn't have enough money to employ you after 6 weeks, but hey, look, you did this project with this startup, and now it's something you can point to and they're excited about. And by the way, you never know if good work is doing, it's amazing how they can find money to extend contracts as well. Okay. So there's a shotgun blast of ways in which to approach it, but I think it's understanding where you're going. You're researchers, right? You understand where you're going and how to understand a domain, and so then it's taking the actions to move yourself forward. And I guess, sorry, I would add one more general point that I had is I have had friends a long time ago who simply blasted out hundreds of resumes to people and never heard back from anything. And the question you need, I think, I've reflected over the years why that was, or what was wrong with that. And I think it's because they were never learning during the process. So every time you apply, you're sending out resumes, you're applying, you're networking. Reflect, am I moving forward? And if not, what do I need to do to move forward? What changes do I need to make to be learning from my process so that I can get a PhD in getting a job that I really want and will really enjoy.
Yeah, I think some very good point John have made is being able to start thinking about what you like and what you're good at, and then exploring how that fits with different directions you may be interested in. And in a lot of jobs and industries, I think they do fall in a category where a lot of positions are actually not as well openly advertised. And so, for example, in renewable and climate sector, from what I've seen, I don't think I've seen much posting on those ends. And so network does go a very long way in the sense like, talking to people who have made that career transition, see what the skills are like, what the industry's needs like, and does it align with what you want and what you would like to develop kind of deal. So I think that's a very important part to look at it. There's other ones that where a lot of job postings are out in open. For example, banks and finance. So there's a lot of jobs that's out in open. But also recognizing that at least for data science, a lot of these are reasonably mature, which means the labor market has a lot of people who already have experience. And so they are much harder to market again into without having job experience. Kind of catch-22 that you need job experience to get job, but you don't have a kind of situation. So do keep in mind, especially the ones that are you can easily find in the open job market, chances are they're much harder to market yourself towards, especially the more heavily regulated ones. So finance, for example, healthcare, for example, because having that domain knowledge of regulations goes a long way. And when everyone applying have maybe a year or two of domain experience, then it's really hard to compete. And so I think that's another thing to think about ahead of time. It's that yeah, there are some industries that are more visible, but they're also hard to break in for that reason. And so there's basically two prongs approach on how to approach it. And again, banking, building on what John said, yeah, start building experience. And so if for example, you want to do data science in growth related, marketing related things, find an NGO or find something else into your work where your data analysis translate a lot more directly to it than say astrophysics kind of deal. And from personal experience, like I said, I've worked with an NGO in climate, and a lot of those translate quite well.
Yeah, I just have to say that you have to think about it like a two-dimensional thing, right? Like there's the domain of like what kind of skill sets are required, and the domain of like what type of like what is the subject matter of your job. And if you want to target a job market that is specific in the, like climate and also data science, that's going to be a very narrow field of job, right? So if you might want to think about what is more important. You want to be doing data science and then being open to lots of different areas ways you do data science, or do you want to really work on climate and then be open to lots of ways to do your transferable skills? Because, for example, a lot of climate jobs are actually policy related and research related, which a PhD has a ton of transferable skills for because we do research, right? But uh, like for example, in government, like my ministry has a lot of climate jobs, and then we got reorganized a bit. But when previously that climate group is almost entirely policy people. Like there's a few data people, but most of the jobs are policy because it's about writing policy that will regulate how people impact the climate. So it's I think it's like what Rebecca said. It's like do your job market research and know what kind of jobs are there, what type of skills they're looking for, and then how can you match those with the type of skills, or do you want to be doing data and then uh, try to match like the data skills and change and be more flexible in the domain.
And just to pounce on something Henry said there, I think in this context, we're sitting here talking at a room of 50 people. But those of you who are interested in climate, if I would set you the homework, so what Henry just said, if you don't know, when he describes what get a policy job, that sounds like a label, but what does that actually mean? What does a policy person do? What skills do they need to have? And maybe you can try following up with Henry later and see if he answers to you. But I would recommend as well just going and finding your local some local meetup of policy people and having done some pre-reading, searching online, what is government policy, what are the processes, uh, then turn up and meet some of those people and talk, what sort of vacancies are there these days, and pretty quickly someone in the BC government will tell you there are none right now, but maybe in a year's time. But anyway, so that's the path that I would do.
And
Great.
yeah, just to add a little bit on top of it, it's to kind of reiterate the point that even within the same domain or industries, there are very different roles, right? So as Henry pointed out, there's policies role within climate. Obviously, in climate, there's, you can work on renewable, you could work on, say, wildfire control. You can look at, geo remote sensing, which is more relevant to Astro, for example. So yeah, knowing what you want and start talking about like to different people, even within your targeted industry and domain, to see which role interests you more, what does it look like, and what does it take for you to build towards skills, that aligns better to that. And it's pretty important.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. I think we probably have time for one more question. So, one more from the forum was, how can we focus on building transferable skills now, as many of us are still midway through grad school? And what are industry hires looking for, and what can we keep in mind? And Rebecca, I see you made a comment in the chat about setting aside some time to do networking or career researching. Would you be able to expand on that a little bit?
Sure, I'll try and do that quickly. I knew that I was not interested in academic careers, and that for my particular background, which is not in the hard sciences, that it was going to take a lot of work to kind of figure out how to do that. So probably during the last like year or two of my PhD, I knew that I wasn't really getting a lot done on Friday afternoons, so I decided to block off that time and just put it in my calendar where that was dedicated time for me to look up companies, reach out to people and see if they would meet with me for a coffee chat. Um, and that was really valuable because I wound up meeting a lot of people, learning about a lot of different industries that I thought that I wanted to work in. And then after I was like, oh, no, never mind. But it was a structured way to balance finishing a PhD, but also prioritizing building the network, which is hard to prioritize when you're really busy, you're in a lab and you're trying to finish. So I think that networking is good to consider it as a skill because it can feel really awkward to meet strangers sometimes and talk with them. Or maybe not, it depends on who you are. And it's just something that gets easier over time. The advice that John gave is one that I always give is to like finish by asking who else should I talk to? And you'll usually have another contact. But in general, working on your skills during your PhD, like you have so many opportunities to work on things, and it's just there's a lot going on. So it just takes a little bit of time to set aside to narrow down, you know, okay, I think I might be interested in these types of roles, but I see every job posting is asking for like this skill or that knowledge of methodology or using this specific, coding or data analysis, whatever. If you have time still, then you can kind of direct your focus to work on getting those skills, whether it be outside of your program. Maybe you have opportunities for internships, which I would highly suggest. Um, yes, do the internships. It's a great way to have experience. If employers see that, like, oh, they've actually worked in a company, like they want to know that you can do the things outside of your lab. Can they do it in my company? Can they do it with someone else than their supervisor? Working with nonprofits, like Mike mentioned, is a great way to do that too. So there are lots of different ways that you can work on those skills. It's just to take a little bit of time to narrow in on like which ones you want to work on and finding different ways to gain that experience. Hopefully that was helpful.
I would just
Yeah.
just
Oh, sorry.
compelled to say, so when I did a master's degree with an internship was how I converted pure physics degree into a job in fiber optics development at a very exciting time for that industry. The internship, just by the fact that your new potential new hirer can phone someone and get an honest, all right, not in the public sector. In a startup, your hiring manager can just hire someone and get an honest reference that you are a good person who will turn up and do good work is incredibly powerful for cutting through. In the public sector, the fact that you have that employment, they have to infer that you did a good job or not. But similarly, it's just the best. It's the best reference that you did a good job.
Yeah, so especially given how competitive some of the markets are right now, internship does go a very, very long way. It's almost like in academia where it used to be you don't need to have done research experience in undergrad to get into grad school. And things are unfortunately escalating kind of in that sense as well. And so if you have the opportunity, internship definitely goes a very long way, particularly in help you translate directly into at least the industry that the internship is in, rather than like, oh yeah, you need to do a lot of these, hard labor in translating and convincing how your actual skills translate kind of deal. So yeah, I want to say that's a very good point.
And do choose though to choose those internships wisely, right? So if you're interested in picking the example we've had so far, if you're interested in climate, try and find an internship that is in that area or is adjacent to that. It confirms that you didn't just make up because we told you right at the start to customize your resume for the job. The interviewer knows you're doing that. They don't know if you just customize this to say you're very excited about climate. It's something you really want to address. Well, did you tell someone that banking, bringing modern practices to banking was the most important thing for you in your career? Or do you really mean it about climate? And having done an internship and having done volunteer work and having applied your skills in those areas, that's the evidence that you really are interested. And then, if indeed you have if your priority is to work in a particular domain of practice.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. I will just say we're 1 minute past the end time. So I think, Brianna, if you have any concluding remarks you want to say, but thank you, everyone, for an amazing session.
Yeah, I'll just say let's thank our speakers once more, and I hope to see everyone next week.
Good luck, everyone.